The galaxy has a peculiar way of collecting its debts. Not in credits or favors, or even in the empty promises of politicians, but in blood. It's a currency everyone understands, from the lowliest deckhand scrubbing grime off a rusty freighter to the Void Lords themselves, perched atop their thrones of conquered stars. And judging by the amount I've spilt over the years, I owe more than most. It's a grim sort of calculus, one I've become intimately familiar with in my line of work. You weigh the potential payout against the risk, the credits against the lives, and more often than not, you end up subtracting more than you add. These days, I try not to think about that balance sheet. After all, it is hard to make sound decisions when debts old and new claw at your mind. Best to keep busy, which is why I'm currently piloting the Ghost through the fringes of the Meraxes system, technically under the dominion of Void Lord Vorlag, though his grip on these outer reaches is as loose as a drunkard's coin purse. My destination was an unremarkable asteroid designated RX 7842, chosen for its anonymity and its proximity to a major trade route. A perfect spot to conduct a little business, far from prying eyes, even from the Ghost's less-than-stellar sensor suite. The asteroid has no magnetic field to speak of. This is the kind of detail that matters when you're trying to stay off the grid in a galaxy teeming with surveillance tech. As I initiated the docking sequence, the external cameras displayed the asteroid's surface, a rough, uneven expanse of grey rock, pockmarked with craters. I'd cut the main engines a while back, letting inertia and the occasional nudge from the thrusters carry me the rest of the way. Made for a slower approach. But it also meant I wasn't broadcasting my arrival like some Cathar war horn. Not that there was likely anyone around to hear it. This far out, even the most ambitious pirates preferred easier prey. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Something I've grown accustomed to over the years. Living on the edge has a way of sharpening your instincts, honing them to a razor's edge. You learn to trust your gut, even when your head is screaming at you to turn back. Right now, both are quiet. It had been many years since I last met with Phelan, and the thought of seeing him again brought forth a torrent of memories. Most were not good. The Ghost responded to my touch on the controls with a familiar, almost reassuring shudder. A low rumble that vibrated through the deck plates. It's the kind of sound you get used to when you spend most of your life in the void, a reminder that you're one hull breach away from a cold, silent death. But the old girl's always been reliable, even after all the modifications, the beatings, the near misses. She is not much to look at, a cobbled-together mess of mismatched parts and jury-rigged systems. But she's fast, maneuverable, and most importantly, she's mine. Besides, in my line of work, it's better to be underestimated. A beat-up freighter is less likely to attract attention than a sleek, new model. I ran a diagnostic check on the Whisper Drive, a system that still made the hair on my neck stand up even after all this time. The Zith called it Kakeshtak, or Shadowfold, a far more apt name if you asked me. It worked by creating a localized distortion in space-time, allowing a ship to effectively fold space and travel vast distances in an incredibly short amount of time. Of course, the Zith, being the gravity-manipulating geniuses they were, made it sound easy. For the rest of us, it was like trying to perform microsurgery with a vibroblade while riding a Cathar war beast. It is an unstable technology, prone to unpredictable fluctuations and with the potential to tear a ship apart if not handled with extreme care. It was also the only way to travel between star systems without spending a lifetime in the void. The drive's status indicator flashed, then settled on a steady green, a small miracle given the patchwork nature of the Ghost's systems. I'd managed to source most of the components from a Voidborn contact, a character named Rix, who made his living scavenging parts from derelict ships in the graveyard, a wreckage field on the edge of the galaxy where countless vessels had met their end. The Voidborn were a peculiar bunch, humans adapted to living in zero-gravity environments. They were often employed as engineers or technicians on space stations and starships, their bodies uniquely suited to the rigors of space. Rix had a particular knack for finding rare and valuable components, and he owed me a favor from a previous encounter. A favor I was more than happy to collect. My thoughts, as they often did, drifted back to the Order of the Argent Star. We were supposed to be the good guys, the shining knights in a galaxy of corruption and tyranny. We had oaths, codes, a whole edifice of righteous bullshit that crumbled to dust the moment we made contact with real power. That was a different lifetime, though, one I try not to dwell on. The Order's training, however, particularly in information analysis and strategic thinking, had proven invaluable. It has given me an edge in a profession where knowledge is often the difference between life and death. The Order's tactics, their knowledge of Void Lord operations, even their understanding of ancient technologies, it all came in handy when you were trying to make a living on the fringes of the galaxy. I initiated the docking clamps, connecting with the asteroid's surface. The ghost shuddered again, then settled into an uneasy stillness. Time to meet the ghosts of the past. I grabbed my gear, Ruin nestled securely in its custom-built holster on my back, Vanguard holstered at my hip. Ruin was an older model energy rifle, a veteran of countless skirmishes, its stock scarred and worn smooth from years of use. I'd modified it extensively, adding a scope, a silencer, and a power regulator that allowed me to adjust the intensity of each shot. It was a weapon that had saved my life on more than one occasion, and I treated it with the respect it deserved. Vanguard, on the other hand, was a more recent acquisition, a heavily modified energy pistol designed for close-quarters combat. It was compact, powerful, and utterly reliable. The rendezvous point was an abandoned mining facility, carved deep into the asteroid's crust, a relic from a long-dead corporation that had likely gone bankrupt or been absorbed by one of the Void Lord's conglomerates. These old facilities were a dime a dozen on the fringes, most picked clean by scavengers, but this one was still relatively intact, its main power grid inexplicably still operational. Phelan's instructions had been specific, almost paranoid. Come alone. No weapons, no tracking devices. He always did have a flair for the dramatic. I, of course, brought both weapons and a small, easily concealed tracking device because only a fool trusts blindly in this line of work. You learn that lesson once, maybe twice if you're slow, or you die. It is that simple. The tracking device was a small disc-shaped object no bigger than a credit chip. It emitted a low-frequency signal that could be picked up by a receiver on the Ghost, allowing me to be located even in areas with heavy electromagnetic interference. Phelan was waiting for me just inside the main processing chamber, a cavernous space filled with dormant machinery, drills, conveyors, and the skeletal remains of a refinery system. A single work light, jury-rigged to the facility's power grid, lent the space a claustrophobic feel, despite its size. He hadn't changed much in the years since I'd last seen him. Still lean, still wiry, with that same intensity in his eyes that used to make even hardened soldiers nervous. He was a true believer, a revolutionary to the core. Me, I was just a guy trying to make a living in a galaxy that chewed up idealists and spat out broken men. Rexton, it's been a long time. Long enough, I replied. You haven't changed a bit, he said with a wry grin. Can't say the same for you, Phelan. You look like you've aged a decade for every year that passed. The fight takes its toll, he said, his smile fading. But it's a fight we can't afford to lose. Is that what we are doing here? I thought this was a business transaction. It is. But it is also much more. We have a chance to strike a blow against the Void Lords, a real blow, the kind that could change everything. He was referring, of course, to the mission he'd outlined in his message. Assassinate Lord Obsidian. Phelan believed this was a chance to shatter the Obsidian Accord, to break the stalemate that had kept the Void Lords from each other's throats for decades. He also knew it would disrupt the delicate, morbid equilibrium the galaxy had settled into. He saw it as a necessary evil, a catalyst for change, even if that change came at the cost of unimaginable chaos. He called it the price of liberation, a phrase I recognized from my time in the Order. It referred to a controversial philosophy that justified extreme measures in the pursuit of a greater good, even if innocent lives were lost. Obsidian, I said, the name leaving a grit like pulverized bone on my tongue. They say he's not even human anymore. He's not. He's a puppet, a vessel, controlled by something else. This was the part of the briefing that had made me skeptical. A parasitic alien entity feeding on the despair of the oppressed. It sounded like the kind of story you'd hear in a cantina after one too many rounds of rotgut. But Phelan was serious, deadly serious. He believed every word of it. "And you think killing this thing will bring down the Void Lords?" I asked, injecting a healthy dose of skepticism into my voice. "It's our best shot. The Obsidian Accord is a fragile thing. It's held together by fear, by the threat of mutual annihilation. But Obsidian, or rather, the thing controlling him, it's the linchpin. It's the one thing all the other Void Lords fear more than each other." Phelan went on to explain his theory, something about the entity being a psychic amplifier, a creature that fed on negative emotions and used its power to maintain the balance of terror. It was a wild story, full of holes, but there was a certain logic to it. The Void Lords were a fractious bunch, constantly vying for power, always on the verge of all-out war. Something had to be keeping them in check. He explained that the entity was the only thing preventing a catastrophic civil war, a war that would make the current oppression look like a golden age. "So what you're saying is, we kill this thing and the whole galaxy goes up in flames?" "It's a risk," Phelan admitted. "But it's a risk we have to take. We can't live under their boot forever. We have to fight for our freedom no matter the cost." "Freedom," I scoffed. "That's a word that's lost all meaning in this galaxy. These days it's just another excuse to spill more blood." "Maybe," Phelan said, "but it's all we have left. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let them take that from us too." He laid out the plan. The details of the infiltration, the layout of the Obsidian citadel. A monstrous construct of dark metal and ancient technology, a fortress that dwarfed any battleship. It was a suicide mission. But the reward, a flicker of that old idealism I thought I'd buried long ago, surfaced. Maybe Phelan was right. Maybe this was a chance to make a difference, to finally balance the scales. Or maybe I was just a fool, chasing the ghost of a chance at redemption. "There's something else," Phelan said, interrupting my thoughts. "Something you should know about." He paused as if searching for the right words. "There are elements within the Resistance. They have their own agenda. They are planning to use the chaos, to seize power for themselves after we eliminate the entity." "Let me guess," I said, a cynical smile playing on my lips. "They want a piece of the pie." "It's more than that. They want the whole damn bakery. They see this as an opportunity to become the new Void Lords." This was a wrinkle I hadn't anticipated. It added another layer of complexity to an already impossible mission. Not only did I have to contend with Lord Obsidian and his alien parasite, but I also had to watch my back for ambitious rebels looking to stab me in the back. Perfect. "So, who are these elements?" "I don't know for sure, but I have my suspicions. Just be careful who you trust." "Trust," I said with a humorless laugh. "That's a rare commodity these days." We spent the next few hours going over the plan in detail, Phelan laying out everything he knew about the Obsidian citadel, its defenses, and the entity that controlled it. He showed me schematics of the fortress, highlighting potential entry points, weak spots in the security, and the location of Lord Obsidian's private chambers. It was clear that he had been planning this for a long time, that he had gathered intelligence from a variety of sources, including spies, informants, and even a few defectors from Obsidian's own ranks. But there were gaps, large ones in their knowledge. The entity was an unknown quantity. Its capabilities, its weaknesses, all a matter of speculation. The Obsidian citadel materialized before me, a monstrous silhouette against the backdrop of 1,000 stars. It was less a fortress and more a malevolent entity. It resembled a colossal Gothic cathedral, adrift in the void, constructed from a dark, unreflective metal. Its surface was a complex assemblage of sharp angles, towering spires, and ominous protrusions that served as weapon emplacements. The scale of it was difficult to comprehend, dwarfing even the largest battleships I'd encountered. It was a physical manifestation of oppression, a symbol designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Getting inside was a problem that had been eating at me since Phelan first outlined the mission. Brute force was out of the question. The Citadel's defenses were legendary, capable of withstanding a full-scale assault from a rival Void Lord's fleet. A more subtle approach was required. I opted for a maintenance hatch, identified in the schematics Phelan provided, located on the Citadel's underbelly, far from the main docking bays and heavily trafficked areas. The location was also close to the engineering section, which gave me a potential pathway toward the Citadel's core. I piloted the Ghost closer, relying on the Citadel's own bulk to mask my approach from its primary sensor arrays. It was a risky maneuver, one that required precise timing and a healthy dose of luck. The Ghost skimmed along the Citadel's surface, navigating a labyrinth of external structures. It felt like flying through the belly of a leviathan, never quite sure when its jaws might snap shut. This close, the Citadel's surface was a dizzying array of detail. Massive gun turrets, sensor arrays that tracked across the void, and docking bays large enough to accommodate entire squadrons of fighters. The hatch itself was a small, unassuming thing, easily overlooked amidst the Citadel's vastness. It was designed for maintenance drones, not humans, which meant it was going to be a tight fit. I extended the Ghost's manipulator arm, a delicate operation that required a surgeon's touch. One wrong move and I'd either damage the hatch or trigger an alarm, neither of which was a desirable outcome. The arm's magnetic clamps locked onto the hatch's access panel, and with a gentle twist it popped open, revealing a narrow conduit beyond. Time to get cozy, I muttered to myself, engaging the Wraith suit's cloaking system. The suit was made from a synthetic material that bent light around it, rendering the wearer virtually invisible. It also dampened sound and masked thermal signatures, making it ideal for infiltration. Its optical camouflage was state-of-the-art, able to adapt to different environments and lighting conditions. It was the product of years of research and development, acquired at great expense from a black market contact on Trantor 7. I slipped out of the Ghost's airlock and into the conduit, the Wraith suit conforming to the narrow space. It was a tight squeeze even for someone of my build. I moved slowly, using my hands and feet to feel my way through the darkness, careful not to make any noise that might alert the Citadel's internal security. The Wraith suit's enhanced audio sensors amplified every sound, from the drip of condensation to the distant noise of machinery. The conduit twisted and turned, a serpent winding its way through the Citadel's innards. I followed the path indicated on the schematics, a digital map overlaid on my visor, moving deeper and deeper into the heart of the fortress. I could feel the Citadel's presence all around me, a sense of immense power and oppressive weight. The conduit opened into a larger space, some kind of maintenance hub, filled with a tangle of pipes, conduits, and access tunnels. The place was dimly lit by flickering lights. I could hear the rhythmic thump of machinery, the hiss of pneumatics, and the occasional metallic clang of something shifting within the Citadel's depths. This was where I had to be extra careful. The schematics showed numerous security checkpoints further in, and while the Wraith suit would help with visual detection, it wouldn't fool a determined scan. I moved from shadow to shadow, using the bulky machinery as cover. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, sharpening my focus, heightening my awareness. I reached a junction, a point where several tunnels converged. According to the schematics, one of these tunnels led to the engineering section, and from there, I could access the Citadel's core, where Lord Obsidian and his parasitic passenger resided. But which one? The junction was a confusing maze of identical-looking tunnels, each one disappearing into the darkness. There were no markings, no signs, nothing to indicate which way to go. Then I noticed an almost imperceptible difference in one of the tunnels. A slight discoloration on the wall, barely visible even with the wraith suit's enhanced vision. It looked like a handprint, a small, almost childlike smudge. It was the kind of detail that most people would overlook, but years in the Order had trained me to spot anomalies, to look for the out-of-place detail that could mean the difference between success and failure, life and death. I followed the tunnel. The handprint, I realized, was not a random occurrence. It was a marker, left by someone who had been this way before, a member of the Resistance, perhaps. It was a trail of breadcrumbs, leading me deeper into the labyrinth. The tunnel sloped downwards, the temperature noticeably dropping with each step. I continued to follow the handprints. They led me through a series of chambers, each one more bizarre than the last. The next chamber presented a petrified forest, not of trees, but of what seemed to be calcified arteries, branching structures rising from the floor, their surfaces ridged and hard like bone. From within their hollow cores emanated a green luminescence, not a natural glow, but something mechanically generated, cold and harsh. Beyond that, the following chamber contained not cradles, but structures more akin to metallic rib cages, suspended from the ceiling at varying heights. Each cage held a single, unidentifiable object encased in a cloudy resin, its shape vaguely organic yet disturbingly indistinct, like organs preserved in formaldehyde for an experiment long forgotten or never begun. It was a forgotten menagerie, a silent gallery of the Citadel's hidden, unsettling purposes. Finally, I reached a large circular chamber. This had to be it, the heart of the Citadel. The chamber was massive, its ceiling lost in the darkness high above. In the center of the chamber was a structure, a towering edifice of black metal that resembled a grotesque throne. And on the throne sat Lord Obsidian. He was a towering figure clad in black armor that absorbed the surrounding light, his face obscured by a mirrored visor. He was perfectly still, like a statue, but I could sense the power emanating from him. As I watched, the armor shifted, the plates sliding against each other with a soft metallic rasp. A section of the armor on his chest opened, revealing a glimpse of something inside. It was a cluster of black pseudopods, thick and slick, constantly extruding and retracting like oiled muscle testing its flex. The vermis anima. Phelan had referred to it in his briefings as the soul worm, a term he claimed to have translated from some dead language found in ancient texts. He'd said it was an alien parasitic entity, drawn to power and feeding on despair. He'd sketched out its supposed form, vague, shifting, always obscured, and described its abilities: psychic manipulation, physical augmentation of its host, a connection to some larger network he termed a hive mind. Frankly, it had sounded like madman's ramblings until this moment, but seeing those slick black pseudopods, the way the metal seemed to writhe around them like living tissue, there was no denying its reality. It was a physical abomination, but Phelan's theories hinted at something more insidious, a corruption that went beyond flesh and metal, something that touched the fabric of the galaxy itself. The sight of it sent a jolt of pure, primal fear through me. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a creature from a nightmare, a thing that defied all logic and reason. It was the source of the oppressive energy that permeated the Citadel, the source of the fear that gripped the galaxy. I could feel its presence in my mind, a force that sought to probe my thoughts, to break my will. Then a voice, unheard but felt, a hateful resonance in my mind.
"You are not of the Accord. Why have you come?"
The voice was a chorus of whispers, a symphony of madness that echoed through my skull, each word a spike of ice driven into my brain. It was the voice of the entity, and it was inside my head. My training with the Order of the Argent Star had included mental disciplines, techniques for shielding one's mind from external influence. They were designed to counter interrogation, psychic manipulation, and the psychological trauma of war. I'd always considered them a bit esoteric, more suited to the Order's quasi-mystical leanings than to practical combat. Now I called upon those lessons, erecting barriers in my mind, visualizing a fortress of polished steel, unassailable and impenetrable. I focused, drawing on every ounce of mental fortitude I possessed, trying to block out the entity's invasive presence. But it was like trying to extinguish a star with a breath. The entity's voice bored into my mind with the insistent pressure of a drill, each syllable grinding against my will. The mental fortress I had constructed began to fracture under the strain, hairline cracks spiderwebbing across its once smooth surfaces. I felt my resolve fraying, unraveling thread by thread, as my thoughts became tangled and indistinct, like comm signals lost in a nebulous storm.
Who sent you?
The chorus continued, each word a hammer blow against my mental defenses.
Answer.
Obsidian's form remained motionless, a statue of dark metal, yet I knew the entity was aware of my every thought, my every fear. It was toying with me, probing my mind, searching for a weakness to exploit. The entity's presence was suffocating, a crushing weight that made it difficult to think, to breathe. It felt as though the air had been replaced with something thick, something that sought to smother me from the inside. I needed to buy time, to figure out a way to fight back against this mental assault. I couldn't simply stand here and let the entity pick my brain clean. I had to disrupt its focus, to throw it off balance. I reached for a memory, a particularly painful one, the destruction of the rebel cell I'd once targeted, an event that continued to haunt me to this day. I'd thought I was doing the right thing, following orders, eliminating a threat. I was wrong. The memory of that mistake, the faces of the dead, the weight of their blood on my hands. It was a wound that had never fully healed. I pushed the memory to the forefront of my mind, offering it up to the entity like a sacrifice. It was a desperate attempt to use my own pain against my enemy. The entity seemed to recoil, its voice faltering for a fraction of a second. It was like striking a physical blow, a momentary disruption in its assault. The mental pressure eased, just slightly, but enough to give me a sliver of breathing room.
Pain!
The chorus hissed, the multitude of voices momentarily diverging in tone and intensity before regaining their hateful synchrony.
You carry pain, like a shroud.
The entity was feeding on the memory, on the negative emotions that it evoked. It was a dangerous game, offering it sustenance, but it was the only way I could think of to keep it from digging deeper, from uncovering my true purpose. It was like offering a starving beast a scrap of meat, hoping to distract it long enough to escape. I've seen my share of suffering, I thought back, trying to project a sense of strength, even though my mind felt like it was being torn apart. More than enough to satisfy your hunger. My mental voice felt weak, shaky, a fragile thing compared to the entity's presence. I needed to keep it talking, to keep it focused on the memory, while I tried to regain control of my thoughts. Suffering is merely a prelude, the chorus responded, its voice dripping with a vile, anticipatory relish that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The feast is yet to come. My feigned defiance was a thin veil, easily pierced by the entity's probing intrusions. The vermis anima, I thought, forcing the words out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. It was an attempt to shift the focus away from my memories and onto the entity itself. What are you? What do you want? The entity's response was immediate, a surge of hateful amusement that echoed through my mind. We are the inevitable end, the culmination of all things. We are the silence. After the scream. The pressure in my mind intensified. It was like being trapped in a vice, my thoughts squeezed and twisted by an invisible force. I could feel my mental defenses crumbling, the fortress of my mind cracking under the strain. The entity's words were a hateful caress, a promise of oblivion. You cannot comprehend our purpose. Your kind are but fleeting shadows, ephemeral, insignificant. I was losing this mental battle. It was only a matter of time before it broke through my defenses and uncovered everything. I needed a new tactic, a way to break free from this mental duel before it consumed me entirely. Desperation, I realized, has a peculiar scent. It smells like ozone and regret, with a metallic tang of blood. Not the fresh kind, but the rusted old variety that lingers in the back of the throat after a long fight. It was the scent of my own fear, amplified by the entity's psychic assault, filling the chamber, drowning out everything else. I was drowning in it. My mental fortress was collapsing, the entity's voice now a roaring torrent, threatening to sweep away the last vestiges of myself. Then a spark in the encroaching darkness, a memory not of pain or regret, but of something else. Something almost forgotten, the training chambers of the Argent Star. The white walls, the hushed tones of the instructors, the endless drills designed to hone not just the body, but the mind. They called it mental fortification, but it was more than just blocking psychic attacks. It was about resonance, about finding a frequency within yourself that could disrupt external forces, a countercurrent in the psychic sea. The Order, in its later, corrupted years, had become obsessed with ritual and dogma, losing sight of the practical applications of their teachings. But the core principles, the ancient techniques, those remained potent even now. I remembered fragments of chants, not as mystical incantations, but as mnemonic devices, keys to unlock specific mental states. I recalled symbolic movements, not grand gestures, but subtle shifts in posture, focused breathing patterns designed to channel and direct mental energy. I began to breathe deeply, regulating my respiration as I had been taught in the Order's meditation chambers. It was a technique to center oneself, to anchor the mind in the present moment, a bulwark against external influence. Internally, I began the chant, a silent rhythm within my thoughts. It wasn't a prayer, but a formula, a sequence of words designed to activate specific neural pathways, to trigger a state of mental resonance. The words themselves were archaic, almost meaningless, remnants of some long-dead language, but their rhythm, their cadence, was what mattered. Simultaneously, I subtly shifted my stance, aligning my body in a specific posture, a stance of defiance, of centeredness. It was a physical anchor for the mental process, a way to ground the resonance in my physical being. I focused on the symbol of the Argent Star, not the corrupted banner of the later Order, but the original emblem, a stylized silver starburst against a field of black, a symbol of defiance against the void, of light against darkness. I visualized it in my mind's eye, burning bright, radiating a pure, focused energy. Slowly, something shifted. The entity's mental assault faltered, its voice losing some of its crushing intensity, becoming less coherent, more fragmented. It was like a radio signal encountering interference, static creeping into the transmission. The mental pressure eased, not dramatically, but noticeably. The cracks in my mental fortress seemed to stabilize, the spiderwebbing fissures ceasing their expansion. The entity reacted, its mental voice sharpening with a new edge of something akin to surprise, tinged with a nascent fear. It was working. The Argent Star resonance, this forgotten technique, was disrupting the entity's psychic influence. It wasn't a weapon, not in the conventional sense, but a counter-frequency, a psychic dissonance that was throwing the entity off balance. It was like tuning two instruments to clash, creating a jarring, disruptive harmony. I pushed harder, deepening my breathing, intensifying the mental chant, focusing the image of the Argent Star until it felt like a physical presence in my mind, a burning brand against the entity's encroaching darkness. I could feel the resonance building, a vibration within my skull, a subtle tremor that resonated through my entire being. Obsidian's body, still seated on the grotesque throne, began to twitch, a subtle tremor that ran through the dark armor. The mirrored visor flickered, reflecting distorted images of the chamber. A low groan escaped from the armored figure, a sound of pain, or perhaps of something being forcibly evicted. The pseudopods visible through the chest plate writhed more violently, their movements erratic, uncontrolled. The entity's mental voice became a fractured scream, a chorus of agony and confusion. It was losing coherence, its thoughts fragmenting, its power waning. Now, this was the moment. The resonance had created an opening, a vulnerability. The entity was weakened, its focus fractured. It was no longer an untouchable psychic force, but something vulnerable, tangible, something that could be hurt. I drew Vanguard, the energy pistol feeling solid and reassuring in my hand. The weapon hummed to life, emitting a focused whine. I aimed at the exposed section of Obsidian's chest, at the writhing mass of pseudopods. Silence, I thought, projecting the word with as much force as I could muster, channeling the Argent Star resonance, focusing all my will into that single defiant command. And then I fired. The energy blast struck true, a concentrated bolt of energy that slammed into the writhing mass of pseudopods. A shriek, both physical and mental, echoed through the chamber, a sound of pure agony that tore at the fabric of reality. The pseudopods convulsed, thrashing wildly. Black fluid, the ichor of this alien parasite, erupted from the wound, splattering across the floor and the lower part of Lord Obsidian's armor. The fluid shimmered, as if imbued with a fading sentience. It moved with a purpose, the droplets reaching for each other, trying to merge, to reform, but their movements were sluggish. It was as if their ability to cohere and maintain its integrity was rapidly failing. Pieces of pseudopod, severed by the blast, twitched on the ground, their movements becoming weaker until they finally lay still, like some strange, dark, deep space flora cut at the root. The once imposing form of Lord Obsidian slumped back on the throne, his armor groaning under the sudden shift in weight. The mirrored visor went dark, reflecting nothing but the dim lights of the chamber. I didn't linger. There was nothing left for me here. I holstered Vanguard and made my way back through the corridors of the citadel, retracing my steps, guided by the markings I had followed earlier. The ghost streaked through the void, leaving the Obsidian citadel a rapidly shrinking silhouette against the mosaic of stars. I sat in the pilot's chair, my eyes fixed on the viewport, watching as the monstrous fortress receded into the distance. It was still an imposing sight, but it no longer held the same terror for me. It was just a shell now, a relic of a dying age. I took one last look, a silent farewell to the horrors I had faced within those dark walls, and then turned my attention to the star charts, plotting a course for the rendezvous point where Phelan and his crew would be waiting. There would be questions, recriminations, maybe even violence given the factions within the resistance that Phelan had warned me about. But that was a problem for later. For now, I needed to get out of here, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the citadel. Years later, the galaxy was still a mess, but a different kind of mess. The Obsidian Accord, as it had been known, was shattered. The death of Lord Obsidian and the exposure of the Vermis Anima's influence had triggered the very conflict the entity had suppressed for so long. The Void Lords, freed from the creature's control, had turned on each other, their fleets clashing in a series of brutal, devastating battles. The Council of Liberated Worlds, they called it. A grand title for a fragile alliance, cobbled together from the remnants of the resistance, opportunistic warlords, and a handful of planetary systems that had managed to break free from their Void Lord masters during the chaos. They met on Trantor 7, in a newly constructed assembly hall built from salvaged durasteel and precursor crystal, a symbol of their supposed unity and their rejection of the old order. They had outlawed the old ways, the feudal system, the brutal tribute demands, the whole edifice of Void Lord tyranny. In its place, they were trying to build something new, a system based on cooperation, on shared governance, on the principles of freedom and equality. But it was a struggle. On some worlds, the change was real. Former serfs now tilled their own land, free from the crushing taxes and the threat of the gloom charges, devices designed to induce widespread despair and suppress rebellion through targeted emotional manipulation. Trade flourished between systems, unimpeded by the old restrictions and tariffs. There was a sense of hope, a feeling that a better future was possible. You could see it in the faces of the people, in the way they carried themselves, in the way they dared to dream of something more than mere survival. The old fear, while not entirely gone, had lessened its grip, replaced by a cautious optimism. In the newly established free trade zones, alien species like the Zith and the Cathar mingled with humans, exchanging goods and ideas, creating a vibrant, cosmopolitan atmosphere that would have been unthinkable under the Void Lord's rule. But in other places, it was just a new form of the old order, with different faces in charge. The Council, despite its lofty ideals, was rife with internal conflicts, with power struggles and backroom deals. Old habits, it seemed, died hard. Ambitious leaders, many of them former resistance commanders, paid lip service to the ideals of the Council but ruled their territories with an iron fist, using the same tactics as the Void Lords, albeit with less overt brutality. Some implemented resource redistribution programs that, while presented as equitable, often resulted in the seizure of assets from those perceived as having too much, mirroring the old tribute system in a more bureaucratic guise. The new peacekeeping forces were sometimes indistinguishable from the old enforcers, maintaining order with a heavy hand and suppressing dissent with ruthless efficiency. On one planet, formerly a mining colony under a minor Void Lord, the Council had established a workers' collective, a system where all resources were supposedly shared equally. But in practice, the collective was controlled by a small group of administrators who lived in relative luxury while the workers toiled in the mines, their lives little different than they had been under the old regime. The only difference was the absence of regular beatings, replaced by a system of social credits that determined access to basic necessities. And in the shadows, whispers of the old order persisted. Some longed for the brutal stability of the Void Lords, claiming that the Council's rule was weak and indecisive. Others spoke of new, even more dangerous powers rising in the void, filling the vacuum left by the Obsidian Lord. There were rumors of a new, even more insidious threat emerging from the galactic core, a region of space shrouded in mystery and long avoided by even the most daring explorers. These rumors spoke of entities older and more powerful than the vermis anima, beings that viewed organic life as little more than a resource to be harvested. Some of them weren't even rumors. I watched it all unfold from a distance, from a quiet corner of the galaxy where I'd finally found a measure of peace, running a small, unassuming cantina on a backwater planet. I served drinks, listened to stories, and tried not to think too much about the past. But the echoes of my actions still reverberated through the void, shaping the new order in ways I could never have predicted. Was this the future I had fought for? A galaxy still fractured, still struggling, still caught in the grip of power, even if that power was now wielded by a council instead of a single monstrous entity. I didn't have the answers. I wasn't sure there were any. Had I simply replaced one form of tyranny with another? A kinder, gentler version, perhaps, but still a system built on control and compromise. Was true freedom, true individual liberty, even possible on a galactic scale? Or was it just a dream? A fleeting illusion, destined to be crushed under the weight of order, any order, no matter how well-intentioned? I looked at my hands, at the scars that marked a lifetime of violence, and I wondered if the blood I had spilled had been worth it after all. The galaxy, it seemed, was still collecting its debts in ways I was only beginning to understand. The price of blood, it turned out, was far higher than I had ever imagined. It was a price that echoed through the ages, shaping the destiny of stars and the lives of trillions, a price that might never truly be paid in full. The new order was not the utopia some had envisioned, but it was undeniably different. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, but the nature of its dangers had shifted. And perhaps in that shift, there was a glimmer of a future where someday true freedom might be more than just a distant, fading dream.